Porch Radio. I'm Julie Wilder. And if you need a friendly little pep talk about how to navigate the next few years, or if you're looking for a hopeful long-term vision for the future of democracy in America, this Front Porch Radio session is for you. My guest today was one of the first people I wanted to connect with post-election, not only because she is a battle-tested rock star grassroots organizer with big picture perspective. Excuse me, I had a little something in my throat there. But she is also someone I knew would have particular insight into the Florida political operatives being tapped for the Trump administration. Stephanie Porta is legend in our community.
We are all Florida now.
Exactly. Stephanie Porta is legend in our community for their decades-long efforts organizing Florida, which has been a testing ground for the extreme right. Her successful grassroots organization efforts are one of the contributing factors to why the threshold for citizen initiatives was raised from 50% to 60% threshold.
I should be proud of that.
Well, no, I mean, it means that you're a badass when they come for you like that. But yeah, so that was a Republican-backed effort to reduce the amount of initiatives that fought for environmental protection, affordable housing, and criminal justice reform. So yeah, thanks for being so great that they had to do that, because that's why we didn't get the abortion initiative passed. As co-founder and executive director of Organized Florida and Florida Rising, Stephanie focused on building a people-powered statewide organization to even the playing field for people versus corporations and fill the gap of Florida Acorn, where she previously served as a state director until right-wing attacks shuttered the organization. Again, another sign of her success. As co-founder and board member for Florida for All, she demonstrated that transformational politics can shift economic and governing power toward equity and inclusivity. As the owner of SKP Strategy, she currently supports power building across organizations across the nation on the front lines of defeating the fascism that has engulfed her home state, Florida. Stephanie Porta has spent the last 24 years working to support working class communities and communities of color in their fight for equity, dignity, and the power to decide their own destinies. And she's here today as an important point in the fight, for representative democracy, to share her insights that will help us move forward clear-eyed and inspired, hopefully, to each do our part. Stephanie, dear old friend, welcome back to Front Porch Radio. It's so good to see you in person again.
I think it's been almost exactly 10 years.
It's been a long time. Yeah, we were off air for 5 or 7 years or something like that. And you've since moved out of Florida, you traitor.
I know. I give it. No, it's good. It's good. It's good to have Floridians fighting for Floridians outside of Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but I think also having been so deeply entrenched in Florida, organizing for so long, and then also moving away gives you a little bit of a interesting perspective as well. So I just want to say that talk that we had post-election really meant a lot to me. I was still in my feelings, you know?
I still am. It's okay. Yes, you should be.
Yeah.
That means you're not, going numb. That's good. You have to feel the things. But I was like, God, she's so good at her job. You're my friend too, but, you just brought me back to a feeling of not feeling so powerless. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was the thing. It's we're not powerless, there's got to be a lot of things that happen for us to get there. So one of the things that I would love to just open with, because this is not the first time you've faced a setback, where the things that mean a lot to you, have a future that looks not so rosy, right? How do you navigate stuff like this? What's your personal in there?
I spend a lot of time trying to focus on the people I know and the people who came before us, and learning their histories and understanding the struggles has been the inspiration and the hope that I feel keeps me going.
Yeah.
To see folks, especially here in Florida, I focused on organizing Florida for over 20 years. Organizing one state. That is it. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, there's a whole other 49 states over there and a couple of other things. And I've been learning a lot about the movements and the different organizations and the different fights, and get to hear, and not just outside of Florida. I would actually say that while organizing in Florida, a lot of my stuff was very international, but not as focused on the other states. And so I think hearing those stories, learning meeting new organizers, hearing, like having them tell the stories of when people won. And the first thing I did when I got back to Florida, where I often find my magical powers, here in like one of the most beautiful states in the entire country, is like to go to the Springs.
Yeah.
Right? It was like the second, like we got it. Yeah. The day after Thanksgiving, we went to Wekiva, and I got there real early before anybody else. And I was like, this water has been here for 4,000 years. Mm-hmm. It has flowed through many civilizations and people who have been fighting to decide their futures. Like, we are not the first, we are not the last.
Right.
And this water is still here. And one of the things that makes me most sad about Florida is that I'm worried we're not going to have that water. But for now, it's here.
Right.
And I'm going to find my strength in that and in knowing what those fights have been. I mean, even pretty recently, like up in that area, there's a whole squatters movement in Florida's history right there where people were pushed out by the state and pushed off property that they had been cultivating and living in for a long time. And that was a bunch of white people. And like, we don't talk about that story because our state right now wants to make sure all the corporations are in control and that they don't ever hear about people pushing back or winning or any part of our history that shows them a little piece of power. So I feel like digging into what is happening around us, who is doing the work, what are the stories they've been told, who are the people before them, who taught them, how did they get even inspired to take action, because I think that's the biggest thing right now is like we need a lot of people to do a little bit of work.
Right.
There's no path out of this without that.
You know, it's been similar for me. One of the things connecting with you, because you are one of those rock stars for me, and knowing that there are people like you, a lot of people like you out in this world that are not just organizers, but have experience, have wisdom, and have been doing capacity building for decades. I think it was your group that sent me to the Working Family Summit. I was like, I don't know how I ended up there, and thank you so much. But there was a Working Family Summit that was held by the Obama administration, and it had like both of the Obamas, both of the Bidens.
That's so cool.
You know, like Gloria Steinem, all these like big names were there. And as I was looking around the room, I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been into anything like that. And it was a room full of essentially newish, grassroots organizers and activists. It was not a room full of corporations and political interest and things like that. I was like, oh my God, this is the quiet work that is being done right now, was to help support grassroots organizers getting more organized and getting more connected, which is what you started this, is because the strength of a movement, in my experience, having just interviewed a ton of different activists over, a decade's time, is that the strength of the connection, it doesn't even matter the size of the organization so much, but it matters about the strength of the connection between the people in those organizations to each other, because that's what gives you, it bolsters you.
But it's not just each other, it's also people outside the community, in the rest of the community too.
Right.
If an organization doesn't have the relationships with people in the community, then it's the organization and not impacting everybody else. Like we need to always be bringing more people in. We are so far away from being the bigger we, which is something that organizers talk about a lot. Like, we don't have enough power to win right now. We need more people. We don't have the money. The only thing we've got is the people. And so we need to get more people together.
Right.
We need to be less on our own and more. And so I think a lot of that takes like people getting into uncomfortable situations, people going to places they've never been before, talking to people that you're not absolutely 100% comfortable with. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to survive. We're all going to like be able to like talk to your neighbors, which is something also is fascinating from growing up in Florida, where I feel like and also living for many, many years, growing up in a house and then moving back to it 20 years later to help take care of my mom. So in my childhood home, you know all your neighbors. They know everything about you. So and now I'm in a new place, and I was like, what do you do when the electricity goes out and the hurricane comes? I met one of my neighbors. They know one other person on the street, and they've lived there for 45 years.
Wow.
And he's a really great guy, and he's been caring for his mom, and she lives with him, 99 years old. He's retiring early so that he can spend more quality time with his 99-year-old mom. And I was like, I'm so excited for you. You seem like an awesome dude. We're going to be friends. I'm going to throw you a celebration. We're doing a retirement party and a homecoming for you and your mom to spend more time together. And he's like, what? But like, we need more people reaching out to folks that are alone.
Right. Yeah. Community. I mean, that is the foundation. That's the underpinning of the show. Conversations for the common good is our tagline. And, one of the things I told people, back when I was, one of the owners at Dandelion Cafe was, I have a lot of things that I would love to see our culture and our system shift, but you start by throwing parties.
Yeah.
And that's because that's where you make friends, and that's where you are humans, so right?
Yeah.
So you start by throwing parties, dinner parties, like birthday parties, retirement parties, just really let's get together and celebrate and get to know each other,
right?
So that you can't really influence people that don't trust you.
Right.
And so that's how you build trust is by having a good time together, first of all.
Yes.
Feeling each other out, and then also like being able to get to that second and that third and that fourth layer of humanity.
Right. I think it's one-on-ones. It's the check-in. How are you doing?
Right.
What is going on? How is your life? Like, and being able to have that conversation in a real, authentic, like to sit there to actually talk about your life.
Right.
Like, you know what? Oh, and I want to be clear. Like, I will tell you everything that is going on in my life. I'm like, just met you. No filter on that.
Right.
Like, I'm like, this. Oh, because you asked how I was doing. Here are all the ways.
Right.
So if you're not ready for that, I mean, okay, I'm sorry. Tell me.
Right. Well, but I think it's important, like if we look at where we are in history, right? We just came through a pandemic, which was super isolating.
Right.
And I mean, I know I have a hard time leaving my house because I've built up this beautiful, like
comfortable
house with everything that I need right there. So I go to work and I go home, and I realized, and I didn't know what the outcome of the election was going to be, but I realized I was isolating myself too much, which is one of the reasons I rebooted this radio show.
Right.
Because I was like, I have lost touch with having, if I look back at the last 20 years, the conversations I have had on Front Porch Radio, 1 hour dedicated to a deeper than normal conversation with somebody that I don't really know usually, has just opened my eyes, broadened my horizons, and made me care more about a lot of different things that I didn't even know were going on.
Right. Well, it's really easy not to care if you don't know anything's happening.
Right.
And you don't know anybody who's impacted because you're not building any community.
Right.
Right. That's kind of, there's been an acceleration. I mean, it's not just the United States, it's across the world, right? Where people are getting more and more disconnected. And the pandemic made it a lot worse. And the politics of this country right now make it a lot worse, and our cell phones and all the apps and the corporations once again,
right?
Deciding who we're talking to or informing or what's informed. So I think that there's a lot of reasons. Like it is in many ways it is our survival mechanism at this point, right? We literally thought that if we got too close or breed. I mean, my bestie. I had to drop off groceries on her front porch, 20 feet away, and her and her daughter were staring at the door because she was so worried. That was a real thing that happened not long ago. We have had no collective moment of grief, to even acknowledge what we've gone through. I think what we're supposed to do is exactly what we feel like we're not supposed to do. Everything we've been taught to get to this moment has been to disconnect, be more.
And so I think that I
detached.
I sell stickers at my store, and one of them is, your anxiety is lying to you.
That's funny because last week, I was had a little vacation a couple of weeks ago, and hey babe, I think when I'm doing that thing where I repeat the same thing over and over again, it's either my anxiety talking or I'm really excited. So it's like anxiety or excitement. And I was like, oh, how do I get back to that?
Well, both of those are, if I come back to my information of biology, like that, like hyper arousal in it, like it's still a nervous system jack, right? Either way.
Right.
And so, like finding that equilibrium where I know a lot of people right now are in a media out, block out. And I'm like, okay, like that's good. And I want you to feel your feelings. I think you have this thing that you call that emotional inoculation. That's a very fancy word for it. I have a paper in front of me.
I just learned that this year.
Oh, okay.
So
fancy words, but basically feeling your feelings, and also the temptation to stick our head in the sands for a little bit too long. It can also backfire. So it's this constant balance between like not going to either extreme.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking of extremes,
like emotional regulation is something we all have to work on, particularly now.
Yeah. So speaking of extremes, I since I have you here, I really need to ask you about Florida in particular, because I hate to tell the nation that they're draining the swamp, but they're draining the swamp in Florida and they're bringing them into the White House, which, newsflash isn't great. And so that was one of because I was like, oh, who's this? What was her name? Susie Wiles, his chief of staff. And then all of these different people from Florida that he's putting into different positions of power. And I thought about it on two levels. I was like very interested in what your perspective for the rest of the nation was. But then I also had this like thought like, ooh, well, if everyone's leaving Florida, maybe there's an actual opportunity progressively here to fill that vacuum since the talent is leaving. I don't know. Call me optimistic. But yeah, so let's just talk about.
Oh no, there's definitely going to be a whole slew of special elections or opportunities for open seats.
Okay.
And we should be, Ron DeSantis, of course, will appoint bad people and try to keep them in there, and then, make sure that we don't win ever.
Right.
And we need to be figuring out who are the leaders that we want and need, because right now, like I've been saying this for a minute in Florida, I was like, if you're an elected official and you are not even trying to get to the level of an organizer in your community, if you are not doing the extra, if you're not fighting for your people, like literally every day, getting up and fighting for your people, you need to get out of the way, because there are people that want to do that.
Yeah.
And we need every single ounce of power that we have to be using to fight for our people.
And I have to say, here in Orlando,
fuck, buddy. Oh.
We have some really good, representatives, and also like some ones that you're like, I wish that was doing a little bit better. Like, gosh, I wish you were a lot more progressive, right? And so, here in Orlando, we're in a little bit of a blue bubble, which is, a nice place to be.
It's not a blue bubble. It is an island of beautiful people who are protecting each other.
Yeah, that's true. And thank you, because I know that a lot of the foundation work that you did through your different organizations helped set that up. Everybody should be thanking Stephanie right now. I just want to let you know. And so what do you think about, because I mean, you were here in these decades and the lead up to the, I mean, this has been a testing ground, obviously, for the extreme right.
Yes.
What are some of the insights that you have in particular for what happened here and what you think might be happening on the national stage moving forward?
Well, I do think, we are at somewhat of an advantage as Floridians who know these folks and know their histories. The whole Republican Party doesn't all get in line here, right? Like, they're not all friends. Right. They're mostly all friends. And there is something that they do that is way different than what the Democrats do. Like, in the Republican Party, once they identify one of their people, they make sure that they are connected to that infrastructure, and they take care of them no matter what. And on the other side, you don't see that, because one, there's less money, and two, we tend to be like, oh, well, that job is over now. Bye. Then we go to the next thing.
What do you mean by that?
I just think, and I don't think it's just a Florida thing. I think this is a national issue. Like, I think that we see people, or the left, I don't even want to say the left, it's like the Democratic Party sees people as for that moment and that thing. And once they are done with that, then good luck.
Right.
Bye.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's not the support for transitioning out of a term limited position. What can you go on to next? And all of that history and information and relationships then goes to.
Right. So what you're saying is that something that the Conservative Party does really well is invest in its talent.
Yeah,
for the long term. For the long term. Right. There's a long term.
They make sure their bills are paid. They make sure they know each other. Right. Like they're in long-term relationship with each other over time, regardless of what the job is or when they were elected to. Right?
And so in contrast with that, there's, maybe on the left or liberal side, there's more of a disposability there because it's short attention span, cancel culture. Like
I'd say it's a lot of things. I think it's just like we don't think long-term.
Right.
Right? It's this moment, and then we're like, okay, well, yeah, it's hard. Where there's no money. There's, like a million reasons why.
Right.
And the other side, like, you build out the map of what the right wing looks like in Florida, and it is like, have you ever been to Buc-ee's?
No, Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's is a gas station, which Florida loves to celebrate gas stations. Like, I remember them doing, like, governor cutting lines of a Wawa, right? Buc-ee's is a gas station out of Texas. And we stopped at one on our drive down from Florida, which, by the way, Florida has the most expensive gas. We drove all the way from D.C., all the way down, and Florida is by far the most expensive gas as you drive down 95. Just want to point that out there.
Right.
Like, but Buc-ee's is like 100 pumps, gas pumps, like 100 gas pumps, and a giant like Walmart in the middle of 100 gas pumps. And very cheap things, and like very like, there's like a beaver.
Is it like the McDonald's of?
It's like the Super Walmart.
Oh, Super Walmart of
from
gas
like
stations.
The beginning days of Super Walmarts.
Okay,
right?
okay.
So like the right wing in Florida has all those different pieces. Like they have their own ice at this place. They have their own soda. They have their own sausage and
like branding. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking all the different things you can buy in this Super Walmart gas station. It's like they do all of their own things,
right?
And they have it under one roof. That's what I feel like Buc-ee's is the right wing in Florida. Okay. They're all connected. They've all got the thing. They're all still in relationship with each other in some way and connected to the next. And that we just haven't built that infrastructure yet, and haven't had the been in the places that we needed to make the decisions to get to the point that we can be like, you know what, one election actually isn't going to fix everything. And I feel this way about the whole country too, not just here in Florida, but like the idea that one election is going like that had we won, that we'd still be fine, like the country would be fine from fascism, like that it wouldn't be an issue is insane. Like it's in multiple states. It's here. Like it's been here for a minute.
Yeah.
And we thought we were going to win with just votes, right? And that we could turn it around in a real quick second. And
then we would be like, the future is here.
Fascism gone. Woo! Right? Like just like we did when Biden got elected.
Right.
Like it was just done.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, that was fun. We fought that and that's never going to come back. No, it's like, all those jokes about, the Bugs Bunny cartoon where they're like, sawing off the state of Florida.
I haven't seen it, but
it's just like a little meme. Like we're just gonna get rid of Florida.
Right.
It's just like that's all. And life would be good if we just get rid of Florida. Y'all, it spreads.
Right.
It's not just. Borders actually aren't real. Like they're not like a thing that stops things in the time of the internet.
And there are states that are putting together like progressive legislation that other states borrow, and then there are states that put together really terrible conservative legislation that other states also borrow. So these are we've been a model here in a lot of ways, and. For those of us that live here, we're like, first of all, we're kind of used to it. Second of all, I guess the rest of because there's a lot of people that live in cities that are living a great, life, and they don't think these problems are going to reach their doorstep. And then, they're going to be like, oh, because there's just this, like, we talk about bubbles and islands and, different things like that. And people are not, we're such a big nation.
Yes.
We're such a big nation.
And yet so small.
And people are really feeling like, oh, I didn't understand, or I don't know, like, what's going on in Florida. So some of these names that are coming up that are being, like the Matt Gaetz thing, like, everybody here, I mean, thank goodness he withdrew, because obviously they were going to come out and, with that report. But, like, we all knew intimately how bad Matt Gaetz is. Right.
And we also know that, like, that government, like, I'm kind of shocked that that he didn't get through. Right. Like, I was like, they don't care about what it looks like. Right. We know that from our experience living in Florida.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we've seen this story.
Yeah, because he hasn't been
he's been terrible
the whole time.
We've all seen that.
Right.
And yet he has still been elected again and again. It's just, and so what I am amused by is, like, the collective dismay of, like, I can't believe they would try to do, and it's like, yeah, this is what's been happening here.
Yeah.
And also the shock is part of their strategy.
You're right.
Right? Like, to overwhelm us and make us feel powerless, and to make us, like, the most crazy idea. Let's put the guy in charge of laws who's broken all the laws.
Right.
And has nothing else to show for himself.
Right. Well, yeah. And so they create this, like, kind of like chaos and shock scenario
that then gets our people to say, I'm going to turn off the news, and I'm not going to pay. I'm going to go into my bubble.
Right. Right.
All by design. You are doing exactly what the fascists want.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're actually probably not listening to a podcast if you're doing that.
Right. But it's true. And so it's like, how now, like putting on, so that's, like, just the kind of quick and dirty of the underbelly of it. Right. And so what I'm trying to figure out for myself is, like, how do you explain to someone that, like, okay, like, you not participating in voting is exactly what is wanted here? How do we get through that? And so, like, one of the things I've been trying to tell people is, find the thing that breaks your heart and get involved in that, whatever that is. Because if you don't have a passion or a hook, like, sometimes, you don't have the longevity there, but, like, doing some way to get involved in whatever issue feels like the right thing to you, and focusing on that, because there is a need for a lot of people all the time, even when we're not facing fascism or, broken democracy. One thing about democracy is it's participatory, which is awesome and not, it's totally awesome. And one of the things that I see also happening is, like, people on the quote unquote right, they like an authority figure to tell them what to do, and their participation is by obedience. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the left, it's a little bit like too smart and too cool for school kind of vibe. And so they're like, oh, well, I don't like this little aspect of it, so I'm just going to protest and not vote at all.
Well, I think I wouldn't say there's some, yes on it's just hard to describe who are those folks, right? Like, I don't think they're the left, right,
generalizations, right.
But I think on the right, it's actually not the obedience stuff. I think it's more the it's the community. Like, a lot of folks who have gone to that side, like, particularly during 2016, was like, here are people that are going to accept me.
Okay.
And we're hanging out together, rallying in a parking lot, like, waving signs. Like, that was their connection when they didn't have connection, right? Like, that was their way to build community. And it's the same thing on the, the flotillas and the boats meeting up and waving their flags. It's like, these are my people. I found them, right? Like, and it is it's a lot about community. And then it's also a lot about folks who they don't know anything different, right? Like, everybody around them is conservative or Republican. Like, there is no, like, this is what you do.
Right.
Like, you don't have friends or family, or, like, the idea of you all of a sudden one day not being that is so insane that it would upend your entire life.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's
It would be an identity crisis.
Right. You gotta, like, and that's why we need to actually get out of those bubbles, right? Like, we need to talk to people and we need to find out what their experiences are. Like, people, there are some human nature that is going on too, right? Like, people, like, when they don't know, when they're worried about the future, there is like a regular human thing that comes up again on like I want to go over to this, like, what I perceive as being a safer side, right? Like, and that is it. And okay, like, but we have to talk to people. Like, we have to ask them, hey, how'd you end up over here? Yeah. Tell me about your life. Like, I don't actually, like, I want to know what you've been going through. Like, what are the things that have helped shape you who you are? Right. And how you got here, right? And, like, let's have a conversation with somebody like me so you realize that I'm also not evil. Yeah. Right? Like, I'm not the enemy. I'm your neighbor.
Well, yeah, so it's interesting for me because I came from a conservative household. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I know the story. I know what the experiences are, and I still can't understand it other than, that's why I say something like obedience, because
how far out, like, when did you first meet your people that weren't?
When I went to college. Mm-hmm. You know, that was, essentially one of the things that I've been able to do is, again, which is hard in the heartland, I've been exposed to a diverse group of people. Mm-hmm. And that's the joy of living in Florida, is that it is an absolute, everyone talks about New York being a melting pot, but Florida is a huge melting pot. Yes. And if you are not sequestered in, your white neighborhood, you have opportunities to meet all different kinds of people from all different walks of life. And, like here in Florida, like, it wasn't a big surprise that the Cuban population went for Trump in a lot of ways, because like, people tend to lump all Hispanic and Latin people into one group. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no. There's so many subtleties here, Absolutely. But if you don't know that, you don't know that, And so yeah, it's a beautiful experience being here in Florida, because you do get the opportunity, if you choose to be exposed to different voices, different perspectives, and different things like that. But also, I've been watching the state, I remember the days when Obama and Michelle were stumping here, and it was a really good feeling in Florida. Yeah. But then
it's also a different population then.
Right.
Yeah. Like, we've lost a lot of people. And a lot of certain types of people also keep moving here, right? We're still like the number one highest death rate in the country. Like, more Floridians die in Florida every year than are born. Right. But we're also,
and that's because of the retirees. For people who aren't, if you're listening from outside of Florida, a lot of people come here to, retire, which means that they will meet their end here, typically.
Mm-hmm. And they're not going to have any kids while they're retiring here. So, their population minus how many babies people are popping out. Right. There you go. So yeah, I think we've lost a lot of people. I think there's a lot of folks also that have been discouraged too. Right. Like, we passed rights restoration, and then they were like, just kidding. Like, nope, we're not going to do that. And then we're going to like send SWAT teams like in the middle of the night to poor old ladies' homes who voted because they thought their rights had been restored, because they saw it pass as a constitutional amendment. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to threaten, like, he has his own police that's been going after folks saying, you tried to register voters 3 years ago. Like, they've been harassing folks for a long time. This is not a overnight, like, and there's an increasing amount of folks who are unable to vote, like, because of their citizenship status. Right. And that is also, like, who's able to show up and vote is a big difference. Right. But I also think that times have been like, it's like this, like, I feel the increasing pressure every time I come back to Florida. Like, it feels harder for people to live here.
Oh, so much harder, especially with the
and we've been controlled by the right wing for like 25, 30 years. How many? I mean, like, forever.
Property tax, and it's driving up rental rates, not just for homeowners but also for renters. And then with the hurricanes that have been coming through and just slamming us, like, I mean, it doesn't even make logical sense in a lot of ways to continue to live here, especially if you live in a coastal region.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of folks who, if they were able to leave, did.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the things, let's pivot for a second. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Front Porch Radio. I'm Julie Wilder. My guest today is Stephanie Porta. She is a grassroots organizer. And one of the really cool things that you were a part of, you co-authored a paper called Getting Ready and Staying Ready. This was, you ran a bunch of scenarios for the election, like proactively.
I didn't.
Yeah.
But yes, Future Currents, a fantastic organization that's working with organizations all across the country on building their internal capacity and ability to take on these big moments. Right?
Yeah, so this was essentially like running through the different scenarios for this election.
It was the year 2026.
Okay,
and so 2 years into whatever was going to happen. Okay, it was either Biden or Trump, and kind of went through a lot of different situations that are very plausible and very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right? Like every single, and then it switched to Harris and Trump later on too, which was definitely interesting fascinating to see the shift on how people viewed that moment. I got to read the notes of a whole bunch of sessions with over 200 organizations and funders and thinkers and organizers, and from immigrant rights groups to, alliances of funders even.
Right.
So it was pretty cool, and got to study their moments when they were told this is about to happen. It's 2006. All these other things have happened in the last 2 years. So-and-so is president. They basically get told who's president at the end of the scenario. So they can feel each of the things and also see how each of these things is extremely possible, regardless of who's going to win.
Power,
right?
Yeah.
And it was very well done. A really great group of folks put together thoughtful scenarios. And an organization is given, here's the year, this is what's happened. What does your organization do?
Right. What's the response?
Right. And, first it's talking about what is happening to you right now. What's your body doing? Understanding that moment of the fear and the just hearing the idea that, anybody who's read Octavia Butler or who hasn't read Octavia Butler, I'm sure has heard about this moment in one of her books that became a New York Times bestseller almost a decade after she passed, actually more than a decade after she passed away during the pandemic. And so, and she became a New York Times bestseller because when you read her books, particularly Parable of the Sower, you're like, oh, this is happening right now.
Right.
And this was written in the 90s.
It was like she was channeling or prophesying. Yeah.
Right. And when you read it again, there's another chapter in it where it was this summer, right? The day we were working on this paper, and it was you could feel it, right? But the idea is people hear what's possible because nobody on the news is going to say this shit.
Right.
Here's what's possible and how do you orient? What does the organization do? What are the decision making? What do we need to do to be able to be strong enough to take on that moment now? What do we have to do now to survive that?
Right.
And how do we focus our energies?
Yeah. And I mean, first of all, because a lot of what happens in the activism world, it can be very reactive, right?
Yes.
Right? And so we're reacting and responding.
Well, and,
right?
activism and organizing are connected.
Right. Right. And so there's that reaction, but this is hey, let's be proactive. Let's think this through. What is your individual organization's response? And then how can we be connected and coordinated with one another so that there's this larger safety net for all of us? Because I think that that's one of the things is that there's so many, unique issues, within kind of that progressive umbrella that there's just a lot of different factions.
Right.
And so there hasn't been.
Well, if there's an attacks on every single part of your identity in different places, right?
Yeah.
How do you show up just as a human at work, even if your job is not in this world, right?
Right.
Even if your job is being a teacher every day, right?
Right.
Government is attacking who you are.
Right.
How do you
your very
survive?
existence.
And this has been happening here in Florida for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, for a very, very long time. And so I just, some of the key takeaways, were, of course, getting into that kind of body emotional feelings so that you could feel your feelings and then be able to maybe be motivated by those feelings, but not letting the feelings like drive the train, so to speak. And getting into, just some really like brass tacks, because, there was this, when I was reading this paper, it's very good. I'm going to put it in the Front Porch Radio Substack, if anybody wants to read it. But it was talking about how when, starting in January, when the ball starts to roll, so to speak, right? There's actually going to be things that happen that are going to create some momentum that if harnessed correctly, if you can walk us through that a little bit.
I'm like, I don't even know which part that was.
Well, just using, I know I've had this really weird feeling. I've been devastated. I've been in grief, but I also wasn't surprised because I have been connected to activism for a long time and I've been connected to things. And so I had this weird feeling of like slightly being energized, and strangely optimistic when like logically it doesn't make sense to be optimistic. But because I know, if you look at the history of all of the activism that has been happening, even during Obama's presidency, Standing Rock and Occupy Wall Street and all of these different, it's been a practice. It's not like Americans are, rolling over, right?
Right.
There's been a constant practice of showing up. And speaking out.
Right.
And I don't think that disappears overnight.
Right. And that's, there are absolutely moments of opportunity and momentum building. There are things that have to happen no matter what in order for the United States to exist. And if you can plan for those moments and what they look like, then yes, there can be these moments of, movement building that are extremely powerful and help us get closer to building the people power we need to win.
Right.
And it's those moments of response where there's the activism and like the community is coming together and being like, no, is the opportunity for us to be like, okay, all y'all that just showed up in March for this, now get in these organizations.
Right.
When
Stay
everybody's
engaged.
not talking about this and help build the thing, right? Because we've got to build organizations. Those are the things that help us connect to others and to the infrastructure that we need in order to have resources for those fights. Right? Like that's why we have organizations. And we have to build across all of those organizations. So not only do we need to build in those organizations and get more members and more people who are learning and advocating and engaged and identifying a political home, right? Like not Democratic Party, Libertarian, whatever, right? Like a home, an organization that you can work with about your local community and the local government and dealing with the attacks that we're about to have on our people and our communities too, and the state, right? People who are engaged and sending out the alerts when the attack starts, right? And you might not be the person that wants to march all the time, but you might be really good at showing up and making a great dinner for folks who have just spent all day knocking doors in their neighborhood or, did a mutual aid event after the last hurricane came through and now FEMA doesn't exist, right? And nobody has any insurance.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about essentially is large scale mutual care, right? And so a lot of people they don't like the word activist. They don't identify with that. They feel like they maybe are conflict avoidant, right? It's not for everyone, right? Not everybody has the skills to do this, that, or the other thing, but maybe you have graphic design skills. There is so much quiet work that has to happen. Like soup kitchens.
There's a role for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? Defeating fascism takes every type of person. We need you all.
I was reading about what happened. I think I want to say it's in Argentina. You might know. Anyways, some, bad guy took over and he's destroyed the economy.
Are you talking about Chile?
Is it Chile?
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Yeah, and so like everyone's like, oh, he's saving the economy, but he's like literally just destroying and he put he shut down all of the food kitchens, saying that they needed to be inspected or something like that. And I was like, okay, that just sounds like starving your people,
right.
And I think about my roots here in the food movement, and they're talking about deporting all the undocumented immigrants, and what will that do to the food system? There's a lot that can happen quickly that again, we practice disaster capitalism here in the United States, right? So in many places around the world. And so disasters are actually a feature of the system,
right,
for conservatives, and
disaster capitalism. Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's all, every time there is another disaster, somebody's getting rich on this.
Somebody's getting rich on it, and and people are getting scared and demoralized and like losing power, literally, like the actual power, but also, when you're poor or you've taken an economic hit, you're a little bit more codependent, right? So it kind of creates this like,
a cycle.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was really lucky enough to help out in Asheville after the last hurricane and during the, right before the election. And we were doing mutual aid, work and being like, your polling place is closed, right? Like, don't forget to vote too. And we got to hear the most beautiful stories of just like communities coming together. And, people always have this like very whimsical idea of Asheville, but like neighborhoods that had been together through a lot of things actually for the first time came together after that moment. And,
right.
And so it was a real, I'm sure there's some neighborhoods in Asheville where everybody knew each other already, but I remember walking down the street and there was, signs on the poles saying community potluck is no longer every single night. This is a month after the election.
Right.
Or a month after the hurricane.
Right.
And so they're moving to twice a week, and it's at so-and-so's house. And like just really beautiful stuff happening. And it's been happening here in Florida for a long time. And there has been a lot. And that, you asked earlier, like, how do you do this? Like, how do you deal with what's in front of us? Like,
right.
There has been incredible organizing happening here in Florida.
Yeah.
Like for years, they are building something beautiful.
Yeah.
It might not be all showy in public and whatever, but it's happening.
Right.
And you should get involved. And there's a long list of organizations. And I think organizations that work with other organizations is really important. We need less of letting the capitalists and the funders in the world pit nonprofits and organization building and churches, like all the things against each other. We need to be working together.
How concerned are you about they've been talking about, there's a bill that they're wanting to pass, or maybe I don't even know where it's at, but they were talking about basically being able to target nonprofit organizations as terrorist organizations. Yeah. Is how big of a concern is that?
I mean, it's definitely a concern. They will come after, we have to be flexible. Like, this is going to be hard. Things as they exist will not be the same. We have to try new structures. We need to be we need to figure out how to share leadership across and decision making around multiple people, and we need different structures for organizations, and sometimes it might not be as official. We might actually have to have offshore bank accounts. There's multiple levels of things that we should be thinking about.
Right.
Alternative structures. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we do know that the likelihood of every organization that we know right now still being around, or that we all have to look the same, we're going to have to change.
Right.
And I think that's part of the scenario, going through that process is okay, if they do this, how do we adjust?
Right.
Right. We have to survive.
Right.
Somebody does.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, one of the joys here in Orlando in particular, even in my neighborhood, they have Front Porch Fest,
Yeah.
And things like that it's just neighbors getting together. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But that is mutual care.
Right.
That is mutual care. And so even if there's a lot of you that are onboarding into some sort of organized political activation, and obviously that's like your field of awareness and your experience. And there's also like so many other ways that you can build community. What it is it's all hands on deck where you're called to serve.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so some of that is going to be through political action. Right. Some of that is going to be through activism. Some of that's going to be above ground, and some of that's going to be underground.
Yep.
And a lot of it is just going to be families and neighbors and friends, caring for each other. I mean, we're already practicing forms of it through like crowdfunding and different things like that. So it's not that there's like completely untested models out there.
Right.
But
we should try untested. We should try new things too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are some things, we only have a few more minutes here, but, I mean, we're not the first, democracy to be facing a trial like this. What are some things that you have seen in other places that you would hope that America could learn from or pick up on?
Oh, wow. Puerto Rico is a big inspiration right now.
Okay.
I got to spend a little bit of time there. And, for the first time in their history, a third party got second place in the governor's race. When you look, and I was like so intrigued, I couldn't find anybody. I found like an Associated Press article about it, but I went through all the history of those elections on like where was that third party in 2016, and it was at 0.5%, or like less than, and then it was like 5%, and then it was I think 35% this time. 2024, yeah, that's about it. And you can easily see that in the next election, this third party that's been building, Bad Bunny's all out there advocating, building the things too. It's really cool. But they're building a bigger way, right? Like they've had this party that they believe that has, if you know anything about the history of the politics in Puerto Rico, like it's been very, like there's been these three parties and they've just been at war with each other and just can't get out of, can't get unstuck. Is one way that a white person observing it from outside would say. And I'm happy to be corrected a million times on how I told that, right?
Right.
And, you can see that they're building the structure they need to get to the power, right? And it's been organizers and people really building together intentionally, and building a vision that people can see themselves in. And so so I'm inspired by that right now.
Right.
But I think like building power, we have to build power, right? Like it's not just enough for us to be in these like relationships. Like we have to build some time. Are we all showing up to a county commission meeting? Are we are we meeting with our elected officials and actually, are we running? Are we and, are you volunteering with somebody? Or are you what? Like we need fighters.
So what I'm kind of picking up is that, this is a long haul.
Yeah, it's not. We didn't get here overnight.
We didn't get here overnight, and one of the things that we talk about on this program, and will continue to, is that the organizing, especially from the Project 2025 crowd, that's been going on since the 80s, and it was like a 7-generation plan.
Yeah,
to turn America into a Christian theocracy. Right, and so this was decades in the making.
Yes.
Decades and decades.
And the idea that we could ever get out of anything overnight, like in an election, no.
Yeah.
It's been going this way for a minute.
Yeah.
It's been in states for a while, and now they've captured the national government.
Right? So a bit of an acceptance needs to happen here. Yeah. That how we maybe identified as America before, we need to update our understanding of who we are and create a vision for where we want to go.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then have did Donald Trump give
remember?
Up? Did he ever give up? No.
Yeah.
No. He lost and then he came back. And I mean he's incredibly determined.
Well, yes, and I think I said this earlier to you via email. It's like there is nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns, and we get to build the next sun. And so that's where I see your idealism at. Like we're going to build the next thing,
right?
let's do it. Like, this is the time. If it's not now, like,
look,
when is
I
it?
was voting for reform from within. Okay.
Yes.
I was all about, like, I saw a TikTok meme or whatever that said, the opposite of patriarchy. In patriarchy, the men are centered in the needs of men. And in matriarchy, it's not that the women's needs are centered, it's that the children's needs are centered. And so it's not like a direct inverse, right?
Oh my God, that's so, yeah.
Right? And so, I know here I was looking at the harm reduction approach to the election, and I was thinking about the children. I was like, what do we want to leave for our kids?
Yes.
And how because everybody who has a child knows that children are the ones that are the most vulnerable in society. And when women can't leave their husbands because they can't get a divorce, or they accidentally get pregnant, or they're violated and get pregnant, and and then they have a miscarriage, or they try to get an abortion through other means. Those are the people that are going to be hurt, and not to mention, of course, Black folk, queer folk, trans folk,
every single little thing. I mean, I never even got to the point on the Asheville story on this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, listen, a hurricane can cause people's lives. It can ripple lives for generations. Right? And so can we.
Yeah.
And how are we doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's come together for each other. Mm-hmm. Sing some songs, make some soup.
Oh, I want to have a community chorus, like choir or something. Come on. Why do you do that?
Because that's the other part of it, is the bringing in the joy.
We have to have fun. People have to feel like they're building community. Like I said, the right wing, like, they're very good at making people feel this is your community over here.
Right.
We need to be like, hey guys, let's have a fun time over here too.
Yeah. Yeah. Throw parties, get organized, talk to each other, care for each other, and prepare to be resilient. I don't know. Any parting words? We are out of time, unfortunately.
Join an organization. Florida Rising.
Woo-hoo! Florida Rising is great. We are going to put this up on the Front Porch Radio Substack, which I just started, and we're going to list out. You can find ways to contact Stephanie through there if you loved what she had to say. I've got the paper that we mentioned also posted on there. And we're going to continue to do coverage here on Front Porch Radio of everything that's good and happening and radical and fun in our community. Front Porch Radio, I'm Julie Wather. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you
so much. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks. Bye.
WPRK, Winter Park, Florida. This is Mac DeMarco. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a triple shot of John Bon Jovi coming your way.